What's up, everybody? I'm Travis, and my wife, Mikey, and I love sharing our real estate investing journey here in Puerto Rico. If you're watching this, chances are you're planning a renovation or construction project on the island, or maybe you've already started one and realize it's a little bit more complex than you expected. From navigating permits, finding reliable contractors, and maybe you're even managing from a distance, it can all feel extremely overwhelming. And we've definitely been there, so that's exactly why we're making this series. In our previous video, we broke down the first phase of any construction project in Puerto Rico. We showed you how to define your project scope, how to navigate the permissions in the permitting process, and what to expect when you're first getting started. If you missed that episode, we'll link it right here. In this video, part 2 of our construction management in Puerto Rico series, we're diving into the management side of your project. How to develop a realistic budget that reflects local costs and contingencies, how you need to select the right contractor for your scale and level of involvement, and how to keep your project on time and on budget once your construction begins. Managing from the States or living here full time, these are the systems and habits that have saved us and our partners from expensive mistakes. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear roadmap of managing your construction project with confidence here in Puerto Rico. First, a quick story. Don't end up in this situation. We want you to use this case study to fully understand what you're getting yourself into and what the risks are. So let's begin with the story of Bridget. Bridget was a remote investor that we met here networking in Puerto Rico. We're just calling them Bridget because it's a pseudonym and it's based off a real story. She reached out to us because she could see from the quality of our finished developments and also our deep local knowledge of Puerto Rico and its short-term rental market that we would be able to assist her in a consultation. Bridget complained that after investing over $120,000 with 2 other investors and waiting over 18 months for her short-term rental property to be constructed and operating, that her guests were complaining already leaving bad reviews and canceling their reservations. She asked Mikey and I to take a look at the property and give her an honest assessment of what was wrong, and what we found was pretty shocking. Bridget just wasn't a passive investor, though. She had management responsibilities that were based on her operating agreement, and therefore she had an onus of executing the business alongside her partners. Definitely read your operating agreement. I could tell from the poor quality of construction that she and her partners entirely skipped important steps of the construction management process. There were too many issues to recount, but the most glaring was the unfinished roof. There was evidence of water infiltration that was visible on both the first and second floor of the property, meaning that she was experiencing an active roof leak. And of course, as soon as I saw that, I had to jump on a ladder and see what was going on in the roof. The roof consisted of multiple different materials that appeared to have been installed or replaced at different times. A significant portion of Bridget's roof had been replaced with galvanized roofing, but the galvanized sections didn't span the entire roof. Other portions were concrete with no confirmed waterproofing membrane on the exposed concrete. None of the seams or transitions between the different materials were sealed or flashed, which meant that the water was likely entering through all those areas. Active water leaks, whether it's concrete or wood construction, are extremely damaging to a building, and if it's left untreated, it would eventually result in the greater deterioration of the building's envelope. When I asked whether the roof was supposed to be replaced in its entirety as a part of the scope of work, she confirmed that it was supposed to be an entirely new roof. Unfortunately, at this point, they already paid the vendor for the job, even though they didn't have a completed roof. Real estate investing can be a great way to develop your cash flow and your wealth. However, when construction is involved, you have to hire the right people and make sure they have the skill set for the job, and they aren't going to rip you off. Ethics is a big issue. Let's talk about how you don't get scammed like Bridget. Don't be Bridget. Don't be Bridget. So let's talk about how you develop your budget for a construction project. We first talked about scope of work, and it's directly related to this, because for each line item of your scope of work, you need a corresponding number. But where do you get that number from? Well, budgeting is a skill. If you're doing a small scale 1 to 3 bedroom project where you're mainly making superficial improvements like painting or replacing fixtures, you may not need full architectural and MEP drawings. MEP stands for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, if the work is purely cosmetic. But if you're altering the layout or changing utilities, you should engage professionals. Here's the process. You develop your scope of work. You develop floor plans, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing plans if you're altering the layout. Those floor plans need to be created by a licensed architect, and the MEPs need to be created by a licensed engineer. And then you have to perform what's called a takeoff. So you literally count the quantities of materials. So if you're buying piping, it's in linear feet. So piping goes with your plumbing. If you're buying paint, it's in square footage, etc. and so forth. You request multiple bids based off the material quantities that you have counted, and then the amount of labor that is associated with installing it. You bring it to the relevant contractors. You always request multiple bids from multiple contractors for each major scope of work. Don't take one quote and assume that it's fair. Once you receive those bids, compare the line items and make sure, does each contractor include the same scope of work? Are there identical assumptions? If not, you're comparing apples to oranges. You also have to make sure you have a contingency. So what is a contingency? A contingency is some money that you have set aside for your project just in case things go awry. It's almost like an emergency budget. In Puerto Rico, material costs and labor can fluctuate, so consider doing a 10 to 20% contingency on rehab projects. If it's new construction, you may consider doing a lower contingency of around 5%. Don't forget all your non-construction related costs. So that's like your permit fees, your utility upgrade fees, your design fees into your budget. They materially impact your budget, and oftentimes, if you're working with financing, it's a requirement because the lender or bank has their own fees that they charge for offering you money to do your project. You also have to consider an allowance startup. This is when you start working with a contractor and they need basically the amount of money it takes to get the project going. So you might need to purchase materials ahead of time instead of tying up funds, or set aside somewhere between 10 to 15% of your overall budget for them to get started. For smaller projects, let's say less than 100,000, you may skip having full architectural and MEP plans, but you still need a detailed scope of work and multiple bids. Beginners should spend time researching how to describe the work and use ChatGPT or consultants to validate their scope of work. So, why is the budget so important? The only way that you can track your costs and make sure you're not overspending for each category or each line item is that you need to set a budget. Without a budget, you won't be able to tell if you're overspending and or if you're going to run out of the amount of money that you need to finish your scope of work. It's very important to budget at the beginning, middle, end, and through the entire duration of your project. Next up, we're going to talk about selecting a contractor. Selecting the right contractor comes down to a couple of things. For us, the accuracy and timeliness of a bid is major. So if you ask for a bid and you give a contractor a deadline of like a month to get it back to you, but then you have to hound them for 3 to 4 weeks just to get it back, and then they're still 2 weeks later than the deadline, that's a big deal. The other thing is accuracy. Did they pay attention to all your line items? Did they consider everything that goes involved? What subcontractors they may need to talk to? What materials they may need to purchase? And are they including every single item that goes into that scope of work? Or are they choosing to exclude important items? The contractor takes their time to ask clarifying questions and deliver a comprehensive bid shows professionalism. Price is also important, but not everything. A higher bid may be justified if the contractor has a strong track record, good references, and proven quality. Always check references. I'm going to say it again. Always check references. You need to be able to see their work, walk through their finished products, touch the walls, look at the ground, check the plumbing, check their installations, all of that. If you haven't seen their work, you should not be hiring them. The other thing is too, if possible, make sure you meet a client who is satisfied with their work. Trust is the foundation of this business, and it can be more quickly gained if you see that they did right by another client. Depending on the scope of your project and the trades that are engaged, you may need to ensure that your contractor and any of their subcontractors are licensed and bonded. Determine whether you need a general contractor versus a technical contractor like a master plumber or electrician. You typically use a GC when you have larger projects with multiple trades and it involves a lot of project management and coordination. This way, you can work with one entity to do all the scheduling and permits and sourcing. You typically use a specialist if you have a very limited scope that has to do with just electrical or plumbing. If you don't want to manage all the trades, hiring a GC can save you a lot of time and headache. They bring insurance, bonding, and an already proven network of subcontractors with oversight. Now it comes to making sure that you execute your project and you want to keep it on time and on budget. Scheduling is super important. The reason is you need to be able to anticipate when certain installations are going to happen throughout the course of your project and then confirm that it's actually installed to the level and quality that you're looking for. And then you need to be able to render payment when it's completed. And speaking of payment, use percent complete billing. If your project is $100,000, you do not pay the entire $100,000 upfront. Structure payments based on milestones. For smaller jobs, I would say less than $20,000, you might be able to allow a startup fee of 10 to 50%. Or if you're really familiar with the general contractor and it's not your first time using them, you can do 30%. As I mentioned before, consider buying the materials for the contractor if you can. This is something that you typically do on a smaller job, but it gives you a clear line of sight on what's purchased, and you can control the overages if there are any, and you might even be able to return some of the materials if you don't use them. For a larger job, you're going to have to rely on the GC. In greater detail, what's percent complete billing? It's exactly what it sounds like. You do not pay a contractor until they finish the work. So your schedule is broken out to itemize the work into smaller chunks, or they call it a work breakdown schedule, and you pay based off those milestones. So for instance, you don't pay for an entire kitchen to be installed up front. You first pay for the plumbing to be installed, and then you pay for the cabinets to be installed, and then the countertops to be installed. And you confirm that each of those phases are actually installed first before you render payment. So based off your work breakdown schedule and your milestones, you can consider offering incentives or penalties in the event that your project is moving faster than anticipated, or instead if it's behind schedule. Incentives look like a project bonus if it finishes early, and Penalties look like a clawback if there's unnecessary delays that are caused by the contractor. This should all be communicated upfront ahead of time, and it should be in a written contract. Maintain regular progress check-ins. Even as a passive owner, you should schedule weekly updates, brief site visits or virtual inspections, photo reports, and invoice versus scope of work check-ins. You need to track any change orders. Any deviation from the original scope of work must be documented, and the price must be approved in writing. You want to limit surprise costs as much as possible, and you don't want scope creep. Ultimately, communication is key. When delays happen, find out if it's due to weather, supply shortages, labor shortages, or scheduling issues. Some delays you may be able to absorb. Some you have to hold the contractor accountable for. Make sure you schedule a final inspection as well. Before you pay out the contractor finally, walk the job with the contractor or hire an inspector to do so to make sure that every line item is confirmed to be completed, that the quality meets your expectations, the utilities are working, that the permit inspections are closed out, etc., and so forth. Today, we try to give you an overview of everything that goes into the construction management process with some additional details about how to do so in Puerto Rico. If you find this video helpful, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear what kind of project you're into and what you're working on, or what questions you still have about building in Puerto Rico. And of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. For those of you who've been following our journey and want to go a step further, Mikey and I have opened a crowdfund for our next real estate project, a boutique hotel right here in San Juan. It's designed for investors who want to diversify in real estate and hospitality without having to manage a project themselves. The minimum buy-in starts at just $5,000 and incentives begin at $10,000 and up. It's a way to participate in something meaningful in a project that's professionally managed, rooted in community, and accessible to everyday investors. If that sounds like something interesting to you, check out the link in our description for details and next steps.